Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Spoiler Warning Podcast. This is review number 643 with our review of Sound of Metal. I'm Christopher Schnese.
And I'm Stephen Miller.
And if you're joining us for the first time, the Spoiler Warning Podcast is a weekly film review program. Each week on the show, we're going to dive in, debate, discuss, and argue over the latest films coming to a streaming platform near you. Earlier in the feeds, we had a review of Mank, and now we are talking about Sound of Metal, which premiered on Amazon Prime Video this past weekend. This is a film that I think was at one of the festivals that we saw things from, but we weren't able to catch it. I don't remember which one it was, but it was something that like I've been looking forward to for a while, and was excited.
I think it was at TIFF when we went to TIFF. Like, I think it was there a long time ago, like over a year ago.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it definitely shows up as a 2019 film, but here it is. It's finally available for us to watch. We're finally getting to see what this is all about. This is a serious film. But to start off, I want to ask you a slightly joking question, and that is, so the two leads in this film, this film's called Sound of Metal. So they play what is, I guess, metal music.
Yeah,
but it's also. It's a lot of noise, right?
I don't know that it's metal. I think it's hardcore. I feel like metal fans would take issue with that being called metal.
Yeah, but either way, do you think the reason they had these characters play very abstract, noise-heavy, like it's kind of like wall of noise music. It's sort of just kind of like, it's not like, when we see the songs, it's like the end of any concert where everybody's just banging away on stuff and everything's going crazy. Do you think that they did that specifically so that these leads wouldn't have to learn these instruments too much?
I don't know. That's a good question. I actually felt impressed because I thought they pulled it off very well. And the genre maybe helps with that because it doesn't need to be perfect. It can be more about the spirit of it. But without getting into a review of the movie, I felt much like Green Room that this movie got the music totally right. Like, this was like a very realistic portrayal of the anarchist live performance spirit. Now, I don't know if they picked this because it would be the easiest way for them to learn how to do something compellingly, because it also, for the storyline, this kind of very loud music that two people could do on their own fits with the, hearing loss. So it's hard to say.
Yeah, but I just definitely like when the song started, like, because I like music, and I like films that work music into the story. But like when you look at something like, say, Whiplash, and you talk about Miles Teller learning the drums to play that role, I have a drum set behind me right now, and I will never be able to play as good as Miles Teller does in Whiplash. I can definitely play as good as Riz Ahmed in this film.
See, I could not play as good as he could, but I have never even learned how to do a drum roll. I'm very uncoordinated when it comes to holding drumsticks.
Yeah, I just thought it was kind of funny because I was kind of excited to see like what they're gonna go for, and I was like, oh, they're going for this like only fans go to this show kind of style of music. Which, I mean, for all I know, both leads play music amazingly on their own. It's just what we're seeing in the film is more simple and a lot of just like prolonged like sound coming out of the instrument and screaming.
Did you ever catch up with Her Smell?
I did not.
Okay. I think it would be interesting to watch Her Smell and try to compare how this movie uses music to how that movie does. Because the genres are different, but I think at least Olivia Cooke is doing something fairly similar to what is happening in Her Smell, and it'd be interesting to see how you feel about it.
Yeah. Well, either way, the metal itself is less important to the story, as the loss of hearing that begins to take effect extremely quickly, which honestly was kind of a surprise to me in this film.
It was a huge surprise to me because I never read the synopsis, so I didn't know what was going to happen.
I think I read the synopsis back when it was in the festival, because I remember like as soon as I saw the name, I was like, oh, that was that one movie about the drummer who was losing his hearing. So yeah, so it's nice to know it was a big surprise for you. Sorry, spoilers for anybody who doesn't know what this
I must be
about.
the only person who would be seeking this out without knowing the twist. I thought it was an addiction story, which like it kind of is, arguably, but that was all I knew about it.
Interesting. Cool. Well, what do you say, Stephen? And also, I do think that we should break this into spoiler, non-spoiler segment, because as much as I'm willing to spoil the fact that this is about a metal drummer beginning to lose his hearing, there is stuff that I really, really want to talk about, which I feel like is it. I think the story's fine if you know that stuff, but it's just I think the experience of it is.
I think we can have a healthy spoiler section for this.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we're gonna go ahead and start by listening to the trailer for Sound of Metal, then we're going to come back and give you a review.
You sound great.
Yeah, right.
What? You told me you weren't feeling it? You were in it.
Hey, we don't need to put them all out.
I know, but we just need to film.
Your hearing is deteriorating rapidly.
We'll come back. Till then, Lou, we just keep going, okay?
No.
Lou,
No.
let's play tomorrow. Let's see what it's like, okay? I'm gonna be like a click track. You can play to me.
You have to understand, your first responsibility is to preserve the hearing you have.
I can't hear you. Do you understand me? I can't. I'm deaf. I'm deaf.
I found a place.
I think it's important that you stay here with us right now, Ruben. We're looking for a solution to this. Not this.
I need you to wait for me, okay? You're it for me, Lou. You're my heart. You're it for me, okay? You gotta wait for me. Trying to save my life.
Ruben, the world does keep moving. It can be a damn cruel place. But those moments of stillness, when this crappy, mundane world suddenly becomes radiant and magnificent, all the fear is gone. That place will never abandon you.
All right, so that was the trailer for Sound of Metal. It is basically the story of this band of two who play metal music, and they're traveling around the country doing performances, just kind of making a living out of their Airstream. And one day, the drummer suddenly has very rapid onset, like degradation of hearing, and it's sort of about how he and more broadly they sort of deal with what's happening to him and what that means for him and them and life. Stephen Miller, what did you think of Sound of Metal?
So first, I want to figure out ground rules for what goes in non-spoiler section. Are we saying him going deaf is a known thing, but the choices that he makes after that are spoilers?
Precisely. Yeah. So basically, we can we're acknowledging that he's going deaf, and that's like just a thing that is happening to him over the course of this film.
Yep.
And we can talk about like the initial place that he goes, basically. How he begins to interact with other deaf people, basically.
Right.
And then everything else we'll consider spoilers.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. That sounds good to me. So The first thing I want to say is this movie is fucking beautiful. I thought this movie was really, really, really lovely and such a pleasant surprise. Like, I'm going to be honest, one downside of doing my recent, like, don't watch a trailer, don't read anything about it thing is when a movie is called The Sound of Metal and the picture is basically a drummer in a metal band, I don't immediately think this movie is going to make me cry. Like that isn't the thing I expect. And this movie completely did. I think it should be obvious just from the premise that this is a great headphone movie, but this is a great headphone movie. Yeah. Like this, the way this movie uses sound is ingenious, and it is a thing that only cinema could do, which I think is like it's rare to find a movie that the only way to convey what it wants to convey is through the medium. Some of this felt, I don't want to say extra personal, but the fear that Riz Ahmed's character feels kind of struck a chord with me, because in my own like minor way, I had issues like 2 years ago now maybe where suddenly my hearing was fucked up. Like I'd been on too many plane rides or something, and for like a month and a half, like my ears would just be shut, and maybe like they would open for a few minutes and then they would shut again. And even that minor, like losing, I don't know, 30% or whatever for a month was like existentially, it was like very upsetting to me, because the way you perceive the world has changed, and that makes you feel distant from other people. And of course that like doesn't light a candle to people who actually experience deafness. But like anything that like changes your equilibrium, suddenly your priorities shift so radically from like going about your day and maximizing happiness and, you know, get the right coffee in the morning, blah, 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 to like, fuck, I want to hear like these like basic human needs. When they go away, it is really upsetting. And I think Riz Ahmed is fantastic in this movie in showing how you would react to this experience, how you would like try to cope, how you would ignore it at first and be in denial, and then the like immense frustration you would feel when you realize that there's nothing you can do about it. I think I will argue there are 3 stars of this movie: Riz Ahmed, Olivia Cooke, and Paul Raci. And I think they're all fantastic.
Is he the leader of that home?
Yeah, exactly. I think they're all fantastic in the role that they have to play. There's just so much here to love, but I really think it's just about putting you in the position of a person who has gone deaf. The end. Like that alone, that elevator pitch is amazing. Like the fact that this movie, I assume, is true to life. It seems like the cast of this movie, they were pretty inclusive. Like they tried to make sure they cast many deaf people to play themselves and make sure that like, you know, they were getting actual feedback from people who have experienced this before. I don't know how you work out how does it sound to lose your hearing, and like other things we'll talk about in spoilers too, but I have faith that they did their homework. And to me, that is just an amazing achievement in film, especially for a small, kind of unassuming movie like this to do. I think the arc of, I mentioned before, so I hope it doesn't count as a spoiler, like he is also an addict, and the arc of this as a parallel to addiction and like the phases that you go through and the letting go that happens, it is all extraordinarily moving. Like immediately this movie is very, very moving. And then it has a few tricks up its sleeve toward the end that hit you even harder out of nowhere. And it is so elegant and so smart, and it doesn't overdo anything, and nothing outstays its welcome. And I just thought it was really, really, really a fantastic movie, and I was so happy that I watched it. And again, in spoilers, we'll talk more, but this wades into some very sensitive issues among the deaf community and how the deaf community views the hearing community and vice versa, that I think it just handles it all very, very beautifully, and it demonstrates why that would be a thing without... Yeah, it's just such a good, sensitive movie that hits really, really, really hard, and I thought it was a real gem. And yeah, it made me cry all alone on my couch on Sunday morning.
Yeah, I the first thing I want to just double stamp that you said is, like earlier today, there's a call we have twice weekly at the office, which you're usually on, and you were not on today. And in that group, people were asking what movies came out, and I said Sound of Metal, and then they asked me how it was, and I was like, well, I can't say because we haven't recorded this episode yet, but what I will say is, if you usually watch films with other people, do whatever you can so that you can watch this in headphones, because as you said, like, one of the things we've talked about as COVID has been happening is that, like, just the loss of going to see things on the big screen, being in an auditorium with people. This is maybe the only movie that I've ever seen that I would rather have seen it alone in headphones than be able to have seen it. And even though we missed it at the festival when we were there and had the chance to see it, I think the only way to watch this film is to watch it in headphones. Like, half of my experience of watching this film is just the thinking of the fact that I'm, like, just the acknowledgement that I have headphones on, and specifically noise canceling headphones, because there's a thing that happens with noise canceling headphones where, like, if you're not playing something, there's this eerie sense of the loss of the outside world. And this is a film that is doing that at the same time. And it's just this beautiful marriage of the art that you're consuming and the reality of how you're consuming it. Like, it is a brilliant, brilliant presentation of an idea. And it's like, even if the story of this film was horrible, which it is not, I would still praise the shit out of this film because of what it's doing. And I'm aware that I'm a fully hearing person. I'm slightly wary of coming off like a white person that just watched Crash and thinks they understand racism now. But what this film does magically is that, so when I first read the synopsis for this way back when, I was excited for it. But what I was excited for at the time was the idea of Riz Ahmed losing music, which means a lot to us, to other people, to like music is a thing that you experience that brings you joy. Lots of events I've done throughout my life have surrounded music. Some of the best times I've had has been going to concerts, and thinking of losing that. And then on top of that, thinking of what if that is your livelihood? Like, you do music for your life. Like, you live in a little Airstream and you travel around the country. And if you lose music, you kind of have nothing. And that's what I was thinking of. I, like an idiot, was not even thinking about just the loss of sound itself. Like, forget the emotional ties to individual things that you hear. What about just all the other things that exist in the world? And how would that sudden loss, like, as you said, like, it is frightening. Like, I haven't had the prolonged, like, I didn't have the situation that you have, but I've definitely had times where, like, I know you're not supposed to use Q-tips, but I do because I'm never going to not use them. And I've definitely, like, had some times where, like, I kind of, like, hit something wrong, and then for, like, a week, I feel like there's something in there, and I'm just like, did I do something wrong? Like, and I've had, like, mini, like, I'm like, nope, I'm just going to write it out. And, like, 3 weeks later, it was fine. But I could hear totally fine. It was just, like, if I yawned, I heard, like, a little, like, crackle in my ear, right? It was just something that was, like, seemed scary, but everything's fine. But, like, I never really have thought about all the things about our sensory input that are strictly sound and what that does to you. Like, when I first got AirPods, if I had the noise canceling on, but I didn't have music playing, like a podcast at end, and it was the end of a playlist and it stopped going, that weird feeling of, like, being able to hear my breath from inside my body, like, even that would be gone in this situation, right? Like, where it's I don't know, I didn't understand that feeling of loss on that level. I was thinking emotional ties to the world, not the tie to reality suddenly being gone. And what I think this film does amazingly, even besides that, is, like, you and I have had experience, probably being around a dinner table where everybody at that table speaks a language that is not English. and we only speak English. And being thrust into that situation where it's like everybody's communicating and you're literally getting nothing. You can get context clues for like whether they're talking about something funny or sad or exciting or whatever, but you're just like there waiting for somebody to clue you in on what's happening. Imagine if that was just like everything forever.
Yep. And that does get to one of the brilliant things that I don't want to ruin in spoilers, is it very much brings that analogy back around in a way that I was like, oh, amazing. Amazing writing in this movie.
Yeah. So I love this film immensely, and it's a film that it doesn't just hit you intellectually. It like hits you, like you feel it as though like it brings you into that character and you experience the world as him. And there are lots of films that let you empathize with a character, but I haven't seen a lot of films that let you literally have his POV. I mean, it's third person POV, but like you have his auditory POV, and those moments just, it kind of floored me. Like I was watching this film and I was like, this might be the greatest film I've ever seen.
No, I know. I went through the same experience when I started to realize what it was doing and how it was using sound and sound mixing to get you there. It is really spectacular. I also think, again, even the name is so clever, because there are at least 3 interpretations of that name, 2 of which I can talk about now. There's the obvious one of music. Metal, I would argue they're probably hardcore, but hey, heavy metal, hardcore, who knows? Something like that. There is also a wonderful scene that I would say is his first starting to come to terms with his situation and how to find joy in it, involving him and a kid communicating via a piece of metal. That I was like, oh, you brilliant movie. This is what you're talking about. And then they do something else, and it's just great. This is the kind of movie that I feel like would take forever to conceive of, because it is just like, there's no fat on this movie. Like, it knows exactly what it wants to do, and it just does it amazingly. Yeah.
And I do really like those, like specifically those scenes. There are a couple scenes where people are hearing sound through, sometimes it's metal, sometimes it's other things. But they're basically hearing sound through vibrations. And there's been like lately, like if I've got like just a couple minutes before a meeting's going to start, since we're all working from home, I'll just put on my bass and I'll just like play around on it, like while I'm waiting for the meeting to start. And I've noticed this interesting thing. I don't know if it's extra because of wearing the noise canceling headphones all the time, but I can't really hear what I'm playing, but I can feel it through the strap going over my shoulder. So it's like I play it and I feel the note, like the lower I go on the bass, the more I hear it in my ear through the strap on my like it just, there's something that's like really really interesting. So like all the moments in this film where you are hearing the sound transmitted through other objects, I was just like, oh man, there's just like so much really awesome stuff that this film is doing. And it's kind of and like, we'll get in spoilers, we'll get into like the actual conversation about how the character handles it and how he does it. But it's like, there's so much, the technical execution of what this film is doing is just so good. It's so amazing. So yeah, I can't praise this film enough.
Yeah, I agree. I also want to say, and this message is in the trailer, so I feel like it isn't spoilery, there is a notion of stillness and acceptance and what it would mean to just embrace the solitude and find your own meaning in it, that I think, like many films in 2020 especially, that had an extra oomph for me, because so many of us are kind of trying to do that in our lives, is we're used to the noise and the daily grind and the world spinning around us, and now all of a sudden we are sitting in rooms trying to find meaning again. And I just thought it was a really like a lovely idea of like, how do you derive meaning from yourself, and like in your best days maybe you can do that.
So my question for you, Stephen, is, did you already order from Amazon a stack of spiral notebooks and a box of pencils?
No, but I did actually just open a Christmas present that had pencils and a notebook, so maybe I'll start doing this.
That definitely seems up your alley.
Yeah, well, because I've already been waking up early in the morning and making a cup of coffee, so I'm halfway there. The battle's already, I'm already up.
Now you gotta literally and figuratively crush a donut.
Yes.
So Steven, should we wrap this up so we can get into some spoilers for Sound of Metal?
Yeah.
All right, for everybody who's not going to stick with us, we're going to go ahead and do verdicts for you. I think you probably know where this is going. But Stephen Miller, if you're going to give us a must-see, recommend with the caveat, wait for rental, pass with the caveat, or a must-avoid, what would you give it?
Definitely a must-see. I think this is that rare kind of movie that is both deeply moving and technically mind-blowing. And that it's really hard to do both. And they just found a storyline that does it, and from everything I can tell, it isn't like manipulative or exploitative. Like, they did their homework, they included the right people, they learned what they have to learn, and it shows. I think this is just like a really fantastic movie.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was brilliant. I loved everything it was doing. It handled the subject matter in a way that was wildly different than what I was expecting and what brought me to want to watch the film. And it nailed it so much that I was like, that's so much better than anything that I was thinking you were going to do with this. And this is one of the most experiential films I've ever seen, I've ever experienced. I mean, this is like the Dunkirk of, of this type of story, right? It's like my only tiny complaint is there is a gap in time that I just don't know how long it was and how he advances within that gap of time. It took me it took me like a second to reacclimate once I saw what was happening to sort of settle back in, and I'm totally fine with it, but it's like that was sort of a jarring sudden change. And I don't know if it was just done for time or if the story always included that jump a little bit. But yeah, that's my tiniest complaint, but it's still an amazing film.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. Like I said, there isn't an ounce of fat on this movie. It could have indulged in more fat. Like, this movie could have been 15 minutes longer, I think, and it could have given us a little bit more of the traditional arc that I think we were all expecting in that moment. And the fact that it bypasses it is totally cool, and it shows some confidence because they had other places they wanted to get to, but yeah. I would have loved to just cry for a little longer.
But yeah, I mean, it's like a nice steak, right? You want them to render down the fat, but you don't want somebody to just cut all the fat off. Like, that's not what you're asking for.
Right. No, I don't want a fillet. I want at least a New York strip.
Yeah, so that is the non-spoiler part of our review of Sound of Metal. So we are going to do the credits for the episode, and then we're going to transition into those spoilers for you. So for now, Stephen Miller, if people want to find you throughout the week, where can they do that?
People can find me at twitter.com/sdavidmiller or sdavidmiller.com.
People can find me at ChristopherInRealLife.com or Twitter.com/ChristopherIRL. You can find the podcast over at thespoilerwarning.com, where you can get a bunch of the back episodes of the show. If you want to subscribe to the show, you can do so on Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, or wherever podcasts are found. If you want to know when the episodes go live, you can follow us at Twitter.com/spoilerwarning, Facebook.com/thespoilerwarning, or Instagram.com/thespoilerwarning. If you want to get a hold of us directly, you can send an email to fans@thespoilerwarning.com, or you can use the contact form on our site. Music for this episode will come from the soundtrack to Sound of Metal, so hopefully you're enjoying that. And that music's going to fade up, and when the music fades away, we are going to be talking full-blown spoilers for Sound of Metal, so watch out. It's going to be coming at you.
Gone into the rain today, gone to safety.
Alrighty, we are back. This is spoiler territory. It's the after part of our review of Sound of Metal. We are talking full-blown spoilers for this episode, so watch out. Here they come right now. Let's start just talking about how quickly in the film this starts happening and his sort of immediate reaction. Like I thought it was just kind of, it happens, he freaks the shit out, and he just like takes off to immediately go to a doctor and doesn't tell his girlfriend where he's going, and he's kind of just like, I'm gonna go figure this out. And I thought that was very much like I've definitely been in situations where like things were like my car exploded like while I was driving in it. And I kind of just like pulled over to the side of the road and kind of sat there for a little while, not knowing what to do. Cause I'm like, shit, I use this for everything. And he basically just had his eardrums explode.
Yeah.
And he doesn't even have time to settle and think, oh fuck, what do I do? He immediately just like grabs his phone, bails, and tries to go to someone immediately. I mean, he goes to a pharmacy at first because he doesn't know where to go besides that. But it was definitely, I felt like his panic and his desire not to immediately ask for help, but to go, like, not to ask for help from his girlfriend or tell her what's going on, but just to like dart out the door and immediately try to talk to somebody as soon as possible. In our world, we would be like furiously Googling, like, can you suddenly lose your hearing? But given that they live in, they're living that nomad land lifestyle.
Yeah.
Anyways, so yeah, what were your thoughts on that?
Oh, I mean, I found that very relatable because I think that's what I would do in that scenario is first try to downplay it and then try to be like, all right, I'm going to go problem solve. I'm going to do it. Not going to bother anybody with this. Probably I am hearing, and I'm just, I'm just crazy right now. I'm just overthinking it too much. Him reaching for decongestants, also way too real. Like that is for sure what I would do in that situation also. And yeah, like the stages of grief that he kind of goes through over the course of the next 24, 48 hours, I think is it really made it feel like Ruben and Lou are both like fully thought out characters that have whole backstories that we only barely get to learn about, and we don't need to learn about it, but it informs why they would act the way they would act in that moment. Yeah. And like the way he has the pent-up aggression and the desire to redirect it and the desire to be like sturdy and in control, and then it all just like fits together so well in the kind of roller coaster of a few days that he has after that. So yeah, I mean, that was how the movie hooked me right away, was watching him, how like in the beginning he's so calm and peaceful, and how at odds that is with his, the music that he makes, like him waking up in the morning listening to like old-timey music and kind of like dancing while he makes a smoothie. Already you're seeing like the two pieces of him, and then watching them kind of collide when a real terrifying event happens to him. Like already that was an amazing character study, and that's before all of the weepy heartfelt stuff.
Yeah. And watching him experiment even before he leaves the little their home, like him trying to pop his ears by yawning, like that's a thing that you like, if you've ever been on a plane or driven to like Julian or something as a kid, you know, like going into the mountains, you always like, you discover just on your own that like eventually you yawn and it pops your ears, and him just like trying to do the yawn and popping, and then like getting more and more frantic as he can't unpop it, and like using the magic bullet and then not hearing all the sound coming from it, and just like the panic sort of wash over him was, I think that's when I transitioned from this is a story about the thing you care about being lost because of the loss of hearing, and then it being simply about the loss of hearing and everything else that affects in your life. Like that's where I started to really like see that transition come into place. And I was like, oh, I'm in for something wildly different than what I was expecting. And that's also when I was like, damn, dude, headphones was the right choice for this. Yeah. Like I told Jamie after I finished, cause she was working on some stuff, so she didn't watch the film with me. And like, she was like, how was it? And I was like, I like when you watch movies with me, but I'm going to be honest, I'm glad you didn't watch this one with me, because I think this film needed headphones to get the full experience from it. So yeah, that was just adding more bits to it.
So there's a couple big spoilery things to talk about. I don't know if I should go to the obvious one first or leap ahead to the slightly less obvious one, but let's start with the obvious one. Getting cochlear implants. That is like a big pivot in this movie, and it is hinted early on. And I don't know a ton about the deaf community. I knew enough to know that cochlear implants are controversial, because it's generally seen as trying to brute force, quote, solve a, quote, problem, when, the general rallying cry of the deaf community is like, this is not a problem. This is a language. This is a new way to express yourself. And like, we are happy to be this, and we don't need a coarse version of, you know, the auditory world as a substitute for it. I was really thinking when he went to get cochlear implants that this movie was going to be just vilifying it, or at least making it be like, this was a huge mistake he made. He like threw his life away. Now he has nothing. And it doesn't do that either. It does a really good job of showing the pros and cons, and again, the technical achievement, which I can only imagine is accurate, of showing how it is not a substitute. It is the sound of metal. You know, it is a different thing that you are hearing.
Yeah.
And it isn't the same beauty that you had in the regular world. It becomes a noise that is more jarring and harsh to you because you've been so used to silence for so long. And I just thought that was phenomenal. I was so interested. Like, at that point, the movie already was amazing just from the way it used mixing to show what it might feel like to lose your hearing, but then showing what it would feel like to get it back in this kind of warped digital way. My mind was just blown by that.
Yeah, I think for me, that the most brilliant portrayal. I can't even say the most. Like, there are like several moments of him experience the cochlear implants that do something brilliant. The first is when he's first turning them on, and he's like, "This is weird," and then she's like, "Oh, let me make adjustments," and he's like, "Oh, cool, so we can fine tune this." And the more that they tweak the knobs, and it's only ever worse or different, and he's like, "No, the other go back to the other one," and then like. Then the woman just says, "Look, you need to get used to the fact that this is just how the world sounds to you now. These devices don't bring it back to what you considered normal before. This is the thing that you're getting. So you will now have sound, but it is this distorted, as you said, metal version of the world. And that is just, this is your new normal. So get used to that." That sort of realization is still like, it's just hugely impactful of like, because I was from a technical standpoint, not a technical execution of the film, but from a technical execution of what this device does in the real world, I was like, oh shit, so you just fucking tweak these knobs. It's kind of like when you're going to get glasses, like they flip the little lenses of your eye and they say better or worse, and you go like worse, and then they flip the other lens and you're like, okay, better, and then they figure out what your prescription is, right? In my head, I'm like, oh shit, that's really, really cool. And then when she stops him and goes like, nah, you had 3 settings and it sounds like all 3 settings are real bad, so enjoy. Like that was the first like, fuck. And I think, see, what's weird about this film, and I don't know if we should just popcorn this and like bounce all around, but like when that jump in time we referenced in the main episode where he's suddenly begun to adapt, like he knows enough sign language to communicate with people. He is sort of like, been interacting with these children. He's found a place for himself, and he's sort of going there. So when he has to sell his home, the Airstream, like at that point in time, he has already been given the chance to stay on with them and become like a staff member and stay and working with the kids. So it's like, in a sense, that doesn't feel like a sacrifice. It's only after he decides to get the implants and finds out what the result is that retroactively it makes those decisions to get rid of those things feel suddenly like they have weight. Because at the time, you're like, yo, like obviously your girlfriend probably forgot about you. You got this teacher here. You got these kids that love you. You got like all these new friends. We don't know how long it's been, but like you kind of have your own new life, and you don't need those things that tied you to that old world. But it's when he makes the decision to like literally tie himself to that world through these implants, it makes everything he's given up to get to that point suddenly become a sacrifice, when before it was like superfluous stuff that he doesn't need anymore.
Right.
So that kind of like, that was like the first like fuck moment, which was really kind of like impactful to see him respond to that stuff.
Yeah, well, and then what he's given up is this new family as well. And I think that is one of the things the movie does so well, that like the actor who plays Joe just really nails. Is this was, again, one of those things I was vaguely aware of, was that, you know, it is seen often as a negative to get cochlear implants, or maybe not always as a betrayal, but, you know, as a thing that is going against the spirit of living as a deaf person and being a part of the ASL community. The way he handles that as a guy who is both looking out for all of the deaf people in his care and then also looking out for all of the former addicts in his care, and how those two things are combining for him, and how sensitively he draws a hard line and says, like, you've made a decision and I can't let you stay here having made that, but I genuinely hope it gives you happiness. And he even has, like, you know, holding back tears that he lets out when Ruben leaves. It's just so good. It is so well done, and it communicates a complicated thing that I don't think the write it in a paragraph version would have worked for me. I think I would have been like, yeah, but why? I mean, you're doing something to augment you're writing a thing that to you was an absence because you grew up with hearing, so why would that be a problem? But then he does such a good job of communicating that, and then the movie does such a good job of supplementing that to kind of explain the difference. And yeah, I thought that was like one of the most difficult things to execute in that movie, was that pivot point, and I feel like it just completely nailed it.
Oh yeah, it's one of those things too where when he starts to do it, it feels like a punishment, and then the more he talks about it, you realize that it's not about him. It's not about Ruben. It's about everyone else who lives at that home and what that message communicates to them if he's made this decision on his own. So it's like, it adds like an extra, like, it's not just the weight of the two people at that table. It's all of the other people who are at that house or compound or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And like, it definitely, because like half of you wants to be like, he doesn't have anywhere else to go, you're just going to kick him out. But then you're like, well, you kind of really do have to. But yeah, it was definitely a very heavy moment for sure. So here's a question for you that I want to, because he, at first, when he first arrives at the place, at the home, his goal is, I just need to get better so that I can leave. At some point, he realizes that he's not going to get better, and he transitions into living without hearing. And he's sort of like, he becomes embedded in the group and has friends, and he's having fun. And, you know, you've already brought up the fact that this film tries to mirror the behavior of an addict with how he is on his arc. And he's sort of happy. Like, there's like, you see him with genuine happiness, and he doesn't miss that life. But then he decides he just wants a little taste, a little bump. And he goes and he finds the computer and looks up his girlfriend and sees that she's like playing shows alone with like looping pedals and shit like that. And he's instantly, I need to fix this. We need to get out and play again. It's like this life that he has forgotten and gotten past suddenly comes roaring back to him. And it's like he's making the decisions for a person he cannot communicate with for reasons that he can't justify, because he's just reverting back to the original goal, which was, we played a show tonight and it was fucked up because I couldn't hear. If I can get my hearing back, then we can start playing shows again. And it's like he just, in an instant, he's relapsed. And now it's all about him playing metal again instead of being in this life that he's made for himself, adapting to the new life that he has. So it's kind of like, it is that scene where you're watching a character in another film relapse, but it's it's like such a drastic change for him because this involves selling all of his possessions and getting an implant that he doesn't even know if it'll work.
Yeah, and that's why the speed at which it happens, it is a little jarring, but it fits because it feels like a relapse. Like, it feels like how, you know, it takes forever to build up sobriety, and it is very quick to fall off the wagon, right? It's very quick for someone to get that little inkling and then follow it. And that's why, you know, in one of the more blunt parts of the movie, Joe says, "You sound like an addict to me right now."
Yeah.
Like, that's the one time when the movie really underlines the comparison.
And he is, and Riz Ahmed is like acting the shit out of that. Like, he's jonesing in that scene like really hard. And it was very like, it was one of those things where, like, you know, like, there's a couple lines that Joe says in that scene, like the one, like, "We're not trying to fix this, we're trying to fix this," like, all, like, those kind of lines. They would be cheesy if you were in the writing room and you didn't have a finished movie. And like, if you're just looking at the words, you're like, that's kind of on the nose. But in the moment, it is so brilliant and so like beautiful that it's like, man, this movie just wrecks you as you're watching it.
So now I want to get to the last big, I think, brilliant, beautiful thing about this movie, which is he leaves, he gets on a plane, and he flies to... it was filmed in Belgium. I don't know if it's supposed to be France or Belgium, but he flies to Europe to go find his girlfriend, Lou, and presumably to try to get the money to, like, get their Airstream back and get their life back. And there are two amazing things about this for me. One is the parallel that we talked about before, about like when you're in a foreign country and you don't understand the language and the isolation that you feel from that. By the end of this journey, I feel like what he's learning is that isolation isn't so bad if you learn how to live with it. And that isolation of being in a foreign country and not speaking the same language, but still knowing how to communicate with each other and still finding joy in that, is similar to the one of not having hearing, but having all these other avenues to express yourself. And it like it flips it, where the early dinner table scene is the chaos and confusion of not understanding, and the end is this relief that, like, we don't need all this noise. Like, it can be beautiful even if we don't perfectly understand each other. So that's one that I thought was just a really, really, like, lovely metaphor in this movie.
Yeah.
The second thing I wanted to highlight is there is a breakup scene in this movie that is so good. Like, it is so good and indirect. Like, very few words are spoken, and it is just done like perfectly. That was like one of the big tearjerkers in this movie for me. I had to like rewind and rewatch it because it just executed it so well with so little, and it said everything in that moment. And I was just really, really, really impressed with that scene. And it didn't need it. Like, this was a movie about him losing his hearing and going on this journey. And then it like also decided to be like, put this amazing cap on the arc of these two characters in a way that was just phenomenal.
This is like the him saying it's okay scene.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I do want to highlight too, another thing, just backing up a little bit before that. He's given up the life that he had made without hearing. He gets the cochlear implants, and he's only ever experiencing the world in small doses where it's just him experiencing it. And then when he goes back to France, Belgium, wherever he is, and he is experiencing a party for the first time, and you get, like, first you're watching the party and you're like, oh, he must be so happy to be with all these people. And then you get his POV and the chaos and the inability for the implants to take that much input. And just think about like how many places you go where there's that much sensory input constantly, and the not being able to deal with that chaos. Like, he solved this problem for tens of thousands of dollars and he thinks everything's good. And then he realizes the first thing that hits you is when he's in all the chaos and he still can't communicate with people because there's too much input and he can't hear because there's too much distortion and all this stuff going on. And then when he is like, when Lou is singing with her dad at the piano, and you're getting this, like, he is lost in the beauty of this moment, even though he is getting like the 12-bit chiptune version of her singing, it's still beautiful to him. And then it's interrupted by the applause of everybody in the room. And it's like, he's lost staring at her and hearing this beautiful degraded sound. And then it's just a rush of chaos that hits him. And he realizes that like, no, he still isn't able to get that thing that he really, really wanted, which is like to see her in it performing. That's still ruined by the fact that other people are there and he can't perceive stuff correctly with all those people there participating as well. So it's just like another time of like realize, it's like the cochlear implants are like the monkey paw, right? It's like you got your wish, you can hear again, but it's going to be distorted for your entire life and it's going to really suck most of the time, but at least you can hear.
Right, like you can hear again, but it will be noise, and that doesn't mean like you won't understand it, but it will be cacophonous. Like it's going to be this thing that is not natural anymore. It isn't a seamless part of your life. It's like a utilitarian thing, and I am the last person to solve the problem of whether hearing impaired people should get implants or not. I understand that, you know. I feel like the only right way to do it would be to view that as a tool that you can turn off and have on for moments when it might be necessary, but not as a thing that you rely on for your primary communication. Because the movie at least makes it seem like it would degrade everything. It's the equivalent of, you know, staring at your phone 24/7, or like being unable to enjoy a sunset because you always have, you know, it's the same overly connected problem that we deal with all the time, but now it is like literally everything around you becomes this digital input that is violating the kind of sanctity and quietness of the life as you've learned how to live it.
So that is the one thing that this film doesn't seem concerned with acknowledging, is that like, so in this relationship, Ruben drives everywhere. And the thing that he drives is this giant machine that is nothing but blind spots and you can't really see anything. And I definitely, as soon as he gets behind the wheel, I was like, shouldn't you have her drive? Like there was definitely like a sense of like, there is some part of hearing which is also about safety and not just about, are you differently abled because of your inability to hear, excuse me. So like that is one thing this film isn't concerned with acknowledging as a counterpoint, I guess, to why you might want to have some sort of augmentation. So that just throwing, I don't really have a real point with that. It's just a thing that I thought about safety. There's a scene in this film where I'm guessing it's when he finally loses all of the hearing. Like it's the moment where he wakes up and like there literally is not a single amount of hearing that he's having at all. And he just wrecks the shit out of a bunch of equipment and he's like hitting things on the ground, and he doesn't seem to be aware that Lou even exists within his same space. And that seemed very, very dangerous and violent. And like, it's like moments like that where like lots of times we've all been doing whatever and lost in thought, and then somebody like comes in and goes, hey, and you're like, oh shit, like, right? Like your entire life would be like that if you couldn't hear, right? Like it's just, everyone is a surprise at all times.
Right. And I think like some important factors there. One is this would be true if you suddenly lost your hearing.
Yeah.
Right. I think living as a deaf person, or like learning how to flow through the world without hearing, other things become more important. Like, you know, there are deaf Lyft drivers, and like there are a few things I think, you know, they get special things in the car to make it so like certain things will translate into visual signals for them. I also have heard that like peripheral vision becomes much more heightened when that's the only input that you have.
Yeah.
But it does the interim is the terrifying part, which is like you are used to heavily relying on this new input stream and you don't have it anymore. And yeah, that would be terrifying. An interesting thing, though, that I think this movie is getting at is more than just hearing and not hearing. It's about like the big difference between a conversation when you can hear and a conversation when you can't is you can passively listen to a conversation when you are hearing something. Like I was talking to my mom last week because my uncle is deaf, and she was talking about how her parents will pick him up and like bring him to their place. And I was realizing like logistically, when you're speaking sign language, you can't sign to someone else when the two of you are on a drive together because the person can't focus on the road and also like turn and be doing sign language with you. And so there's some like inherent focus in communicating via sign language where like when you're talking, you are talking to the person and that is what you are doing and you are not doing anything else.
Yeah.
And I think that the movie turns that into stillness and contentedness and almost meditation of the idea of like be present in the things you can be present in and be still when you can be still. And I just thought that was like a really, really interesting concept that I hadn't really considered before.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of that stillness, you've kind of hinted at this already, but at the end of the film where he like, we've got a speech from Joe early on in the film about like, hey, right now you're worried about what you've lost, but life sucks. The world sucks. There's like sorrow and all sorts of shit in the world that's just terrible. But these moments of pure silence are like the closest thing you have to God, and being able to sit in isolation without the rest of the world interfering on you is like this beautiful moment that you, if you can achieve this, you'll realize that like what you have is actually kind of a gift. And at the end of this film, after this breakup scene has happened, he sits down in a park and like a clock tower starts ringing the bell. And he's just like, shit, I don't want to listen to this. And he just yanks off the cochlear implants. And it's just like, it's like in First Man, right? When they step out of the, the lunar craft and it's just pure silence. And it was like, as soon as that happened, I was like, this is the last shot of the movie and it's fucking brilliant. And it was awesome.
Yeah. It's perfect. It really makes that other SF film movie we watched last year, The Sound of Silence or whatever, feel like not that great anymore.
If I remember correctly, we didn't say it was that great at the time either, right? Or,
yeah, we didn't say it was great, but we appreciated some parts of it, and I feel like even those parts, I feel like this movie just wipes the floor with.
Oh yeah, 100%. This is the tuning fork movie, right? Yeah.
Yeah. This movie is definitely very indicting to me, who certainly in quarantine, like I always throw in headphones. Like the idea of just sitting and being still and not having some kind of input is like nearly impossible to me. So maybe I'll try it. Maybe tomorrow I'll wake up and have a cup of coffee and just like sit there and do nothing for a half hour.
But that's one of the things that like, I mean, this is stupid and it's petty, but it's one of the things that like I was thinking of many times over the course of this, or mostly at the beginning when he's starting to lose his hearing, is that it was different before. Before COVID, there were times when I put my headphones in, and there were most of the times when they were out, right? It was like when I'm walking to the office, they're in. When I'm walking home at night, they're in. In between spits of working, they're in. But now I get up in the morning, shower, and as soon as I'm out of the shower, my headphones go on and they don't go off until I go to sleep at like 1 a.m. And I'm never not with them in. And when I'm doing, like if I'm working, they're in, and I'm either listening to people on a conference call or I'm listening to podcasts when I work. And most of my information that I take in, like we've talked in the past about the fact that like I don't read very much. It's just a thing that like I never really got into, and I don't do it much. So most of my worldly input of anything that's happening in the world is coming from auditory things, podcasts like the thing we're doing right now. And so much of my day is supplemented by having that audio driving processes of my brain and allowing me to focus on one thing while listening to another. And I think that like in a world where like I just couldn't even listen to podcasts anymore, like it's just gone, I don't know how time would pass for me because I wouldn't be able to stimulate myself through audio. And it's like it's a simple, stupid thing to think about, but it's also a thing that like that would be, I mean, like losing the ability to go to movie theaters to watch movies was a huge change in my life on its own. And that's like the simplest thing, but not being able to listen to anything, like most of the time doesn't fucking matter because I'm in my apartment alone and there's no one here. And if I'm communicating with somebody, it might be through text, but like stimulation of any type is coming through audio. Right. And that's the thing that I rely on to kind of stay sane. And it's interesting to think of like so many things I could live without, but the simple part of my daily stimulation currently is purely auditory. So it was just one thing that I thought about.
It's interesting to wonder what would come in its place, or would the answer be nothing and don't like learn to live without the constant stimulation? And I think that's kind of one thing the movie's wrestling with.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm about to go to bed and still have one AirPod in and have a podcast on while I fall asleep. Because I've learned no lessons from this movie.
No, so that is the one thing about falling to sleep, especially if there's like another person present, is silence is deafening. Like you kind of, if you're not, if it's one thing if you're like busted ass tired or bunched and you're just like, I'm going to fall asleep, it doesn't matter, you can just pass out. But if you're not you're not in that oh my god, here it comes moment,
right,
you will not go to sleep unless you can have something that doesn't make you hear how much noise you make when you're doing nothing.
Yeah, and one problem of Shelter in Place is I have not had the karma waterfall ever. Right? I've never earned that. Yeah. It's always that like on the fence feeling.
It does, like talking about this does take me back to the whiskey trip that we did, and just you, me, and Luke in small places that are basically like little like twin beds stacked right next to each other, and just the three of us with headphones in going to sleep. Yep. Good times.
Good times.
Any last thoughts before we go, Steven?
No, we did it.
All right, that was the sound of metal, and that was our sound of spoilers. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.